Welcome back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm your host for this afternoon, Rachel Stockman, and boy, do we have a lot going on this afternoon. We are waiting verdicts in two major cases out of California. In just about an hour or so, we're expected to hear the verdict in the MCSTAY family murders case. You'll probably remember this case. Jurors announced Friday that they had come to a verdict. But get this, for an unexplained reason, the judge wanted to wait till today to actually read that. So we'll have that coming up in about an hour. All right, you're listening to Roberta Thornsberry. She's on the stand. She's the defendant's grandmother, and we are just listening there to some home videos. I want to bring in my guest now, Jean Rossi, former federal prosecutor, joining me from D.C. Jean, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Rachel, it's good to see you again. I'm honored to be here.
Well, let's talk about this grandmother, who's the great-grandmother of the 5 children who were killed. Why is she being brought on as a defense witness in the death penalty phase of this case?
The death penalty phase, in my opinion, is all about emotion. Forget the law. It's all about emotion. And if you cannot get the jury to feel that there's some redeeming value in saving the life of the defendant, then he will get the death penalty. And the best way to do that, Rachel, is to bring people in his life, his grandmother, siblings, relatives, that can say that this person has a heart, he has some value, and his life should not be taken. I think she's a very powerful witness in favor of the defendant.
Well, let's listen in really quickly, because it does look like the grandmother there is tearing up a bit in the stand as she's answering those questions. All right, very interesting cross-examination we just listened to of the defendant's grandmother, who was taking the stand as a witness for the defense. I want to bring back in Jean Rossi. What did you make of that cross-examination? Because he really got her to admit, basically, that he was selfish and did this in cold blood.
You know, the cross-examination eviscerated the direct. The direct was pretty good. But the solicitor, the prosecutor, did a fantastic job. His tone of voice, his approach, he was kind and soft, but he got out some very good points. And she admitted, the grandmother defendant admitted that he was an only child, he was selfish, and I think she admitted that Eli was pleading for mercy before his life was taken.
Yeah, and she teared up during that very, very sad testimony to listen to. Can't imagine what this woman had to go through. Let's turn now to the Kellen Winslow case. He's the man facing sexual assault-related allegations for 5 different women. All right, so that's just kind of a good recap of where we are in this case. And all of it really hinges, of course, on the testimony of the Jane Does who spoke to jurors and told their story. Jean Rossi, we're going into several days now of deliberations in this case. We could get a verdict in any moment. I mean, it's taking longer than I would have expected. What do you think's going on here?
Well, it's a combination of 3 things. 1, there are 5 charges, and they're all serious. Number 2, there was a lot of testimony. Number 3, there's a fair amount of documents. And I should add probably another reason. The jury is very thoughtful. I can just tell by how it's going in terms of the trial. But they're taking their time. They're not rushing. Now, I don't think it means that he'd be found guilty of all the charges or innocent of all the charges. And if I had to do a Malcolm Gladwell gut prediction, I think he's going to be found guilty of 2 or 3 charges. The rest could be not guilty or hung.
I'm with you on that, Jean. I think that there's some questions on some of the Jane Doe stories. And one of those Jane Does that I think does have a lot of holes is Jane Doe number 1, who was the first person to testify. Aaron Keller put together this report on her testimony. Why don't you take a listen, see if you believe her. When we come back, I'll bring Jean back on. Okay, so this Jane Doe, I think that the cross-examination was very effective during her testimony. And one of the things, and this was brought up over and over, Jean, is the fact that she climbed over the fence with this guy willingly, when this could have been a time that she ran away. And of course, The prosecution is going to say, well, everyone reacts differently when they are feeling threatened. What do you make of Jane Doe number 1, Gene Rossi?
I have to say that if there's any count that may be an acquittal, I agree with you, it would be Jane Doe 1. There are too many inconsistencies. She identified the wrong vehicle. She evidently stated that his large private area caused her to bleed, but it was a cycle, menstruation. And here's the other thing. Her daughter testified. I think it was Summer Foster. I forget the last name. And the daughter was talking about a GoFundMe page and things like that. And Jane Doe 1 also said, and this didn't come out in your piece, that she had been traumatized when she was 12 years old, 13 years old, and that had haunted her for her whole life. Yet her daughter, with whom she was very close, was never aware of that incident involving her mother. And the last thing is, the daughter didn't even know her mother was testifying till she read about it or heard about it on the news.
Yeah, there's a lot of holes in this story. Again, doesn't necessarily mean she's not telling the truth. I definitely don't want to say that, because she very well could have gone through this horrible ordeal. The question really is there enough there for the jurors to convict him on that count? Right. Is there any reasonable doubt in her story? And I think both of us would agree there appears to be some, but we'll see what the jurors decide. All right, thanks so much, Stacey. Also, I think Stacey doing a good job bringing up some of the inconsistencies or perhaps areas that could raise reasonable doubt in Jane Doe number 2's story, Gene Rossi.
Yes, now this one, I think this one may be a hung jury, possibly conviction. We're at a disadvantage. We can't see the demeanor, but she sounded very soft, sincere. And I think it was sincere when she said she didn't want to look at the defendant during trial to identify him. I think that was authentic. The only big hole in her testimony, if I'm a defense attorney and a possible juror, is, she left out in her initial statement that he had indeed offered her coffee for money for sex, and then later she said no, or vice versa. That's an inconsistency. She should have mentioned that to the police initially.
Yeah, definitely. But again, it's one of those things where if we were to buy his story, right, Gene, that this was consensual, it's odd, right, that a guy would just pick up a homeless person on the side of the road, and then this homeless person would have consensual sex with him. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
And I want to add this, Rachel, is that for a prosecutor, when you have 5 counts, 5 different Jane Does, even though they may be troubled by Jane Doe 1 for various reasons, and you hit the nail on the head, we're just saying that Jane Doe 1 may not be enough beyond reasonable doubt, but that evidence of Jane Doe 1 may permeate and be a cloud over the other Jane Does that may lead to a conviction.
And remember, Jane Doe number 1 was the first Jane Doe that testified. So she's the one that kind of created, I guess you could say, the scene as you would have for the other Jane Does that then testified. Okay, we have to take a quick break here on the Law&Crime Network, but there is a lot going on, including in about 15 minutes or so, we are going to know the verdict in the MCSTAY family murders case out of California. That will be read live. Stay with us.